Okay, so an important aspect of the civil rights movement, particularly as you study it or as scholars look at the civil rights movement, and a question that scholars sometimes ask themselves about civil rights is how do we look at it? How do we view it? How do we kind of frame the civil rights movement? And it's kind of broken down into two different ways to look at what's going on during the 1950s and the 1960s. And the question becomes is what is the civil rights movement? Is it something that great people, individuals, government bodies are doing, where great men are giving great speeches, where governments are passing laws, and then that kind of filters down to everybody else? Or is the civil rights movement something else? Is it something that takes place locally in communities, especially across the South, as individuals come together as groups, and those groups form local resistance to the civil rights laws, the Jim Crow laws of the South, and try to make change happen locally? In other words, is the civil rights movement a top-down movement where important people like Martin Luther King or American presidents like Kennedy or Johnson or Eisenhower or U.S. Congress pass laws and make speeches that create change? Or is it people locally in Montgomery, in Birmingham, in Mississippi, in the towns in communities of Mississippi, who are moving things forward there by registering African Americans to vote, by opening up freedom schools that teach African Americans history and politics, by marching in the streets demanding economic equality and political equality? What's really pushing the civil rights movement forward? And what's more important? And you can't really go wrong either way. I mean, you can even say both are important too if you really want to hedge your bets. But that's kind of the academic debate of it all. And so whenever you look at the civil rights movement, you can look at it in that regard. Is it something, that was controlled by a few people like Martin Luther King Jr., who made fantastic, great speeches that led, mobilized thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who gained support for the civil rights movement in both the North and the South? And that's what helped create change for African Americans. Or was it people on the ground? Was it people like you've maybe never even heard of? People like Fannie Lou Hamer, Bob Moses, Ella Baker, and Julian Bond, people like this who you don't know, but were instrumental in mobilizing locally, who got things moving in the South, especially locally during this period. And the argument against the top-down version is that guys like King, who are so influential and so instrumental and so important to our history as a country, as great as they are, their greatness sometimes overshadows the people on the ground in Mississippi who had boots there and were walking around and risking their lives. And so that's kind of the argument here, is that sometimes we need to kind of maybe push King back a little bit, push the top-down version of civil rights back a little bit to get to the people on the ground who are risking their lives and making changes locally. So that's kind of a big argument in history right now, and there's really probably no right answer, but it's something that we kind of like to talk about. And it's interesting to think about, what is civil rights like if you don't see it as something grand, like all-encompassing, but rather small individual movements that are kind of working in unison together in the South especially to make change happen there.